I'm Lewis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center, your moderator for this series. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Pacific ADA Center on behalf of the ADA National Network. The ADA National Network is made up of 10 regional centers that are federally funded to provide training, technical assistance, and other information as needed on the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can reach your regional ADA center by dialing 1-800-949-4232. Real-time captioning is provided for this webinar. The caption screen can be accessed by choosing the CC icon in the meeting control toolbar. To toggle that meeting control toolbar on, press the Alt key and press it again to make it stay. As always in our sessions, only the speakers will have audio. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, you can dial 1-669-900-9128 or 1-646-558-8656 and use the webinar ID of 845-3662-6656. All of those numbers are in the chat window if you need. I do want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and will be able to be accessed at the adapresentations.org website in the archive section next week. This is the 8th year of this webinar series, which shares issues and promising practices in emergency management, inclusive of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. The series topics cover emergency preparedness and disaster response, recovery and mitigation, as well as accessibility and reasonable accommodation issues under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, and other relevant laws. Upcoming sessions are available at adapresentations.org under the Schedule tab in the Emergency Management section. These monthly webinars occur on the second Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, 12:30 Mountain, and 11:30 Pacific time. By being here, you are on the list to receive notices for future webinars in the series. Those notices go out 2 weeks before the next webinar and open it to registration. You can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation at adapresentations.org in the Schedule section. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. You may submit your questions using the chat area at any time, and the speakers and I will address them at the end of the session, so feel free to submit them as they come to your mind during the presentation. To submit your questions, you put them into that chat area, and there's a picture of that in the window, or if you're using keystrokes, you can use Alt-H and enter that text in the chat area. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may ask your questions by emailing them to adatech@adapacific.org. That's adatech@adapacific.org. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can send a private chat message to the host in the chat window, or you can email us at adatech@adapacific.org, or you can call us at 510-285-5600. Today's ADA National Network learning session is titled Operationalizing the Principles of Inclusion inclusive emergency management. This presentation will outline how key principles for inclusive emergency management are being used by the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, that's Cal OES, Kern County, and the Freed Center for Independent Living to address whole community needs regarding mass vaccination, evacuation and transportation planning, and public safety power shutoff events. Today's speakers are Vance Taylor, the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Georgiana Armstrong, an Emergency Manager in Kern County, and Carly Pacheco, the Executive Director of the Freed Center for Independent Living. I am now going to turn it over to the three of you, Vance, Georgiana, Carly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Louis. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the attendees for participating today. I know that particularly during the pandemic, we've all done enough of these meetings to be very aware that, online is a very, very deep hole. So thanks for tuning in here instead of Hulu or Netflix or any of the other competitors out there. I want to just give a very quick background and let you know, as Louis said, my name is Vance Taylor. I'm the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, which is a very long title. And for those of you that don't know, it's sort of, I think, an unofficial competition in state government. The longer the title, the better. So if that's the case, clearly I'm winning. I know that when we talk about things like inclusive emergency management and use terms like access and functional needs, that most people either know what that means or have a sense of what that might mean. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that there's a real level of clarity, especially when we talk about access and functional needs. So if we go to the next slide, I want you to see exactly how we define it. And this has been written into California state statute. So anytime that laws now build on access and functional needs and inclusion and integration, this is the definition that's being used. Anytime we write a guidance, issue best practices or lessons learned, this is that foundational definition. And it's a lot bigger than most people expect, because we're talking about all of these different individuals from a variety of groups, individuals with developmental, intellectual, or physical disabilities, chronic conditions or injuries, meaning, hey, if you've got a broken leg, you have an access or functional need. That may not be permanent, but for the moment, you have an access or functional need. We're talking about individuals with limited English proficiency and older adults, children, women who are in late stages of pregnancy, those in institutionalized settings, people who are low income, experiencing homelessness, or those who are transportation disadvantaged. And at least in California, if you look at all of those individual populations and overlap it on top of a map of the state, which has 40 million people in it, but you'll see that we're talking about a significant number of individuals. And the reason why that matters is because, historically speaking, we as a nation haven't done a real great job when it comes to being inclusive and considering access and functional needs in the way that we plan, prepare, respond, and recover from disasters. Because of that, we have had gaps built into our emergency management system, not at all intentionally, In fact, we've had wonderful, good, what I would refer to as salt of the earth people, emergency managers that wanted to serve their communities. But unfortunately, what's happened historically is that emergency managers would essentially gather with other emergency managers and they would come up with plans. But because those individuals didn't typically have a lived experience in the access and functional needs world, they lacked the perspective needed to have a broader view of what the whole community needs in order to be safe, secure, and independent before, during, and after disasters. And so they would do things like say, we'll get emergency information out there with a press conference. But they would fail to consider the fact that not everyone could hear the words being said. And so they wouldn't have an ASL interpreter. They wouldn't think about the fact that when you point to a map and say, go here for safety, blind people can't process that information because they can't see it. And so they wouldn't put things out in alternate formats. And they would oftentimes use very complex terminology and lingo, which also presented challenges for people that had limited English proficiency or intellectual disabilities. And so this life-saving information that they wanted to get out didn't actually make it to everyone in the community. And we saw issues, not just in communication, but in evacuation, where they would send school buses to evacuate communities, which worked for most people. But then somebody would roll up in a wheelchair and say, where's the lift? Where's the accessible vehicle? And then that person had to choose between getting on to a bus, having somebody lift them and pick them up and sit them down on a bus, but leaving their wheelchair behind, or having to stay in the impact area and just hope and pray that they would be okay, which, as we know, is a terrible, terrible choice. We saw at shelters that some were not in physically accessible buildings, and some lacked full wraparound services. And again, this was never intentional. It was simply because there was a lack of perspective driven by a lack of lived experience among those in the planning process. To get ahead of this issue, to overcome it, to move beyond it, California leaned forward. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that in 2008, the governor created an Office of Access and Functional Needs and placed that within his Office of Emergency Services, put at its head a senior level executive appointed by the governor with the charge to brief the governor and the director of OES on these issues. So the office now exists to identify what are the needs that everyone has before, during, and after disaster. And then once those needs are identified, how do we work to then integrate them throughout every facet of the emergency management process? And so what I've experienced in my time as chief of this office, first off, countless disasters. In the last 6 years, we've experienced, I think it's 15 of the 20 worst fires in state history. We've also had more declarations that were at the presidential level in the last 6 years than we had in the previous 20 years combined. So I like to think maybe I'm not the jinx, but Maybe I just got here in time. That's how I'll look at that. But as I've seen these different operations, as I've seen these different missions, as we've embarked on these different response activities, it's become very clear to me that what differentiates oftentimes a successful operation from a well-intentioned but lacking response is the degree to which emergency managers operationalize certain principles. And if we go to the next slide, I outline what those are. There are really three key principles that drive successful emergency operations when it comes to inclusivity. Okay, the first one is integration. It's a recognition that we've got to bring people to the table, right? It's not enough to say, hey, we're emergency managers, we're at the table. We have to.
Vance, Vance, this is Louis. I'm sorry. Can you pause for 1 second?
Sure.
We need to make sure our other interpreter, okay. She needs to be spotlighted. So sorry about that, everyone. Okay, she's now spotlighted. Vance, you can go, oh, before you go ahead, one other accessibility issue, captioner, if you can tell me if you are doing, if you give us a link, if you're doing something to an external link like a stream text as well. Some people are asking for that. So if you can take a moment and let us know in the chat window if you have that available.
Okay, then Louis, I'm going to wait till you give me a thumbs up before I keep going.
Correct. Give me 1 second. I'm just waiting to hear a response from the captioner. Okay, there is no external for this, everyone. So the captioning will be from Zoom only. Okay, go ahead, Vance.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. And thanks for pausing on that. We want to make sure everybody can access this and that this information is going to go out to everybody in a way that is meaningful and digestible. So when we're talking about integration, this principle of integration, it really is not enough for people at the table to think, okay, well, I'm here, so let's get going. We have to stop and look to identify who's not at the table, which communities are not being represented. And we can't expect that those communities are proactively going to be able to work their way through the process to make it through to us to get a seat at that table. While many do, which is great, there's too many that can't work through that process. And so we proactively have to look and see who's not there. And we got to find them. And then we need to bring them to the table, because that's the only way that we can actually get everybody's perspective included in these important conversations. That's how we get to understand needs. It's when we make room for everyone. The second principle is partnership. That we have to work together, right? We've got to recognize that emergency management is so much bigger than any one of us, that as communities, we will fail or we will succeed, but we'll do that together. Partnership means that when we work together, we create buy-in, right? We move away from your plan and adopt the mindset about our plan. And there's a level of credibility that comes with that, right? That if there's a shortcoming, that we'll address that together and that we're in this together. And then the third principle is synergy, right? It's this idea that when we come together, we achieve more collectively than we could ever achieve on our own. And those three principles need to be grounded, they need to be rooted within every single emergency operation, within every project, within every product, in order to be successful when it comes to inclusive emergency management. I want to walk you through how we integrated these principles, that we used these principles as foundation pieces for California's mass vaccination pilots that we did. If we go to the next slide. So real quick, as soon as the vaccine came up for COVID-19, the federal government wanted to get this out nationally. They wanted to do mega vaccination sites. They weren't quite sure what that was going to look like, and so they tasked FEMA and Cal OES to develop pilots, right? So we did two big pilots, one at the Oakland Coliseum and one at Cal State LA. And we were going to get vaccines out to the community, and the goal was to reach underserved communities, right? We were going to run through this. I believe it was an 8-week process. And at the end of that, we would have a blueprint that the rest of the country could use to set up their mass vaccination sites. So let's go to the next slide. All right, let's talk about integration, right? Bringing people to the table to understand and address needs. Okay, so we included our AFN stakeholders, right? We brought stakeholders to the table and with them identified and addressed what were some of the needs. And they talked about things like accessibility services. The fact that we needed in-person and video remote interpreting language capabilities, right? So we had in-person ASL interpreters, but we also had VRI, video remote interpreting, available. We had in-person language translators, but we also had a telephonic language translation service where you call, you state the language you need, and within 10 seconds, they connect you with the translator that speaks that language fluently. And that way, everybody could have their language needs met. We also had materials in large fonts, Braille, alternate formats. It was when we had people at the table that they said, hey, we're going to need durable medical equipment, right? Some people might need wheelchairs to sit in. They might need tents that are climate controlled so that they would be safe from the elements. Some people, maybe particularly those on the autism spectrum, might need privacy rooms, right? People have sensory issues, so we got to account for that. They talked about, we need paratransit, we need shuttles, we need train rides, and we need them all to be free. They talked about the need for mobile vaccination clinics, vans that could go out into surrounding neighborhoods and vaccinate people. Next slide. When it came to partnership, right, working together to create buy-in and credibility, we got direct input from the Pacific ADA Center. We got direct input from Disability Rights California. We got direct input from the California Foundation of Independent Living Centers and the State Council of Developmental Disabilities, and many, 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 many other stakeholders and partners. They were involved in planning and implementation from the beginning. They became trusted sources of information for our public messaging. So Cal OES would push out messaging, and some people in the community might not trust government or recognize who or what Cal OES is. And so to have our partners amplify that message made all the difference in the world. We deployed these mobile vaccination clinics I was telling you about directly to independent living centers and other CBO locations. Let's go to the next slide. Synergy, right? And together we can achieve great things. So the goal was to put 6,000 shots in people's arms every day. And what we ended up doing was 9,000 shots a day. And by the time the pilot ended, more than 720,000 vaccines had been administered. More than 103,000 went out through mobile clinics within the community. And again, thinking about equity in underserved communities, more than 68% of all those doses went to targeted underserved communities and people of color, which these successful outcomes were greater than we had ever hoped. And we were able to achieve those outcomes because we worked collaboratively, we worked together. So again, when we talk about emergency management, we can talk about things like mega vaccination sites. We can talk about testing sites. Or, as you'll hear in a moment from our other presenters, you hear about evacuation efforts. You'll hear about ways to address public safety power shutoff events. Whatever the operation is, it needs to be rooted in the principles of integration, right? It needs to be rooted with integration, with partnership, and with synergy. That's how we lift communities. That's how we lift one another. That's how we develop truly inclusive emergency operations that don't leave people behind. It's how we identify and address unmet needs. And it's how we, as individuals and collectively as a society, draw a line in the sand that says in 2022, we are all in and we will achieve and we'll do it together. So thank you for letting me share that with you. I'm happy now to turn that over to Georgiana Armstrong from Kern County, and she'll present about some exciting things that they've done and the way that they're integrating these principles of inclusion.
Thank you, Vance. This is Georgiana Armstrong, and I am the Emergency Services Manager for the County of Kern. I am very grateful that Vance invited me to participate in this seminar, and I'm happy to share with all of you what we've been working on in Kern County. But I do need to clarify, I'm not an expert. I don't consider myself an expert. I don't consider our plan done. We are always looking at our gaps and trying to find ways to improve that. So while I can share with you what we've done in Kern, I'm not trying to present this as we have all the answers, because we don't. Next slide, please. I cannot overemphasize that the ability for emergency managers to be effective in developing plans that work for access and functional need communities is completely dependent on bringing in the subject matter experts. As Vance mentioned in his presentation, prior to really looking at AFN issues, emergency managers worked with stakeholder groups, which were traditionally other emergency managers and first responders. So when we started looking at what we needed to do to develop the plans that were needed for whole community response, it's really reliant on creating an expanded group of stakeholders. And these are the ones that we work with most often in Kern County. It is not a completely inclusive list. These are our main players. And I need to emphasize to the emergency managers on this call, our key partner has been the Independent Living Center of Kern County. They have been extremely generous with their expertise and their knowledge, and they've always been willing to work with us. And while I don't have time to go into their role in all of our projects, please know we could not have completed any of our projects without their direct involvement. And so we are very grateful to the ILC. Next slide, please. As Vance mentioned, if the emergency managers don't have the subject matter expertise, in order to build effective response, we need to bring in the subject matter experts, and that comes from the community organizations. Building that partnership has also enhanced our response capability because these organizations know their clientele, they know their needs, and they also become a trusted community messenger. So working with them helps expand all of the capabilities that we are able to do together. And I would just say, once again, it's almost impossible to get this right without the involvement of those groups. So for a quick, next slide, please. So for a quick overview of how long we've been working on this, Kern County has what we call Ready Kern, which is our alert and notification system. And we were very careful in our campaign graphics, in the fact that we work with Community Action Partnership of Kern County, their 211 line, to assist us with multilingual dissemination of our messages. And we developed several years ago some public service announcements to promote registering for Ready Kern. One of them was specifically targeted at the AFN community. And in order to do that, we worked with the ILC to help bring us quote unquote actors to be in this PSA so that the community we were trying to reach would recognize themselves. That person is speaking to me because they're walking the same walk I am. I did have an epiphany after this aired, as one of our actors who is deaf. He is also the pastor of the largest deaf congregation in Kern County, and he participated in this PSA. Sometime later, he and I were speaking, and he mentioned something to me. He mentioned that one day he was just putting gas in his car, and a young man was riding his bicycle nearby. This young man was not a member of his congregation, but he recognized the pastor from the PSA, went up to the pastor and said, "Where do you get your information? How do you know how to be prepared?" And that really reinforced for me, in order to reach the whole community, we have to feature the whole community. And we also have to look at the dissemination of information to our deaf constituents that really requires looking at going above and beyond what government normally does. We can't expect the community to always come to our website to see what we're doing. We can't rely on typical news releases. We need to be much more specific in how we get that information out. And this was a lesson that he taught me that I have never forgotten, and it is carried forward in other projects. Next slide, please. In 2008, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers advised Kern County of gaps or weaknesses in a local dam that could have massive impacts to Kern County if that dam were to fail. So for 2 years, we worked on developing this massive evacuation plan. After one of the key stakeholder meetings, I went up to the table where we had our AFN groups and asked what their involvement had been with the first responders represented. And basically, they told me there was none. So the first responders were developing their plans based on what they are trained to do in their discipline. But at that point, it hadn't expanded their focus to how are we going to make sure the needs of the entire community are addressed. Next slide, please. Which led to a sister project. We were grateful to have support from the California Office of Emergency Services. We were one of their pilot projects where they provided us with consultants to help us build an evacuation transportation plan for persons with disabilities. The map that you're looking at is the map that if something's going to keep me up at night, it is this one. And we identified facilities where there are people who would need transportation assistance to evacuate. We developed MOUs with the transportation providers that had accessible vehicles, because local government tends not to have that equipment, so that we could incorporate those transportation providers into our incident command system, working with first responders to help evacuate the persons at each of these facilities, which are shown by red dots. We also looked at designating specific bus stops for people who may not be in a facility, but who would require transportation assistance. And all of this, of course, would have been done at no cost. So that was our first major entree into getting into AFN evacuation planning. Next slide, please. While we've not had a dam failure, fortunately, we have had enough fires and incidents where we have used components of that evacuation plan for smaller events. Our lead local department to intake requests for transportation assistance is our Aging and Adult Services Department, which operates a 24/7 hotline number. And in our alerts and warning, we direct people to call this number if they need assistance. Those requests are submitted to the EOC, and we work with the transportation providers to pick folks up and to take them out of the area wherever they need to be, or to a shelter. Next slide, please. Even though access and functional needs is not a traditional ICS position, we did establish a seat in our Emergency Operations Center specifically for access and functional need coordination. Again, Aging and Adult Services is the lead for that position. They are embedded in our operations section, which means if there are gaps or problems that the AFN position identifies, that those concerns are brought to the highest level for immediate response, and it's embedded into what we do. A few years ago, we had an incident where we were very frustrated with the lack of ASL interpretation being shown in our news conferences and briefings. So at that time, we scrambled. We used a cell phone to bring in the various departments that were giving out information for the event. We filmed them using with an ASL interpreter, and then had our public information officers disseminate that through social media outlets. We have since procured more effective camera and recording equipment, which is stored at the EOC. And the entire intentional use of that equipment is to make sure that we can record information for our deaf constituents in a way that it is better able to be seen than just working with a smartphone. Next slide, please. We've also, as we partner with our organizations, we've been able to use some grant funds to help support some of their activities, which help us within emergency management. In Kern County, which is in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, we are separated by mountains from Los Angeles County, which was the source of our ASL interpreters. And we were very concerned about not having ASL interpreters that we could activate immediately. So we worked with the ILC and were able to provide some grant funds so they could expand their ASL program, which they have done. The county now has a contract with the ILC, so when we need interpretation services, they are available locally and they can respond to the EOC quickly. We worked with Community Action Partnership of Kern County as a trusted information source to work with the Spanish-speaking community and lower level income constituents, and they provided training on preparedness and preparedness kits. We were also working with an organization that supports individuals with developmental disabilities. And we were able to use grant funds to purchase some equipment for them, which helps them provide visual training because their clientele are visual learners on how to use their cell phones, to call 911, to register for Ready Kern, and also some basic preparedness information on building kits and home fire safety. So by working with these organizations, they were able to reach sections of our community that would have been difficult to reach for us at the EOC. And we are grateful for their support. Next slide, please. For any ILCs that have, or organizations that are trying to establish a more direct relationship with your local emergency managers, and for emergency managers, if you're not aware, I wanted to bring this up. In 2011, FEMA issued a Directorate Information Bulletin, which specifically says that local government needs to address access and functional needs in our grant programs. The problem was there was a gap. Next slide, please. Because in order for local government to expend funds to actually procure equipment needed for tactical response, it has to have an authorized equipment list number. And keeping in mind that the AEL is the key point to getting into the Homeland Security grants, I wanted to list them because when FEMA added these AEL numbers, it opened it up to jurisdictions throughout the country that if they were willing to budget funds from their grants, they have clear approval to purchase the equipment needed to support various needs at during sheltering situations. We did not have that before. So the FEMA Directorate basically gave us the authority to talk about stuff, but it didn't give us the authority to purchase stuff. We are now at the stage where we are able to purchase equipment as needed using grant funding. Next slide, please. Working with the ILC and other organizations, we have developed an equipment list of the kinds of supplies and equipment that we want to have at our shelters to support various needs. Because Kern County is a large geographic area, we have 3 of these trailers with these specific equipment items stored in them for deployment to any shelter as needed. Next slide. And because Kern County is large and we primarily deal with wildfire situations, we sometimes are very limited in the facilities where we can establish shelters. We were concerned about having accessible bathrooms and showers. So the County of Kern purchased, and what you're looking at is a dual unit, fully accessible bathroom shower trailer that we can deploy to shelter sites to ensure that we have these services available. Next slide. After we built up our equipment for sheltering operations, we realized we had not developed a sheltering SOP, standard operating procedures. We basically thought we do what we do because we know how to do it. But we decided that we needed to get more in depth and to really formalize to make sure that our sheltering operations met the needs of the entire community. So these were our foundational goals: equal access and support, acting on the client's words to define their needs, to support their customary level of independence, and to make sure that what we were doing and how we were doing it was compliant with ADA. Next slide, please. So within our SOP, we have our basic standard, how we set up a shelter, who's activated to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we included a section within our basic plan dealing with each one of these subjects so that our sheltering staff was really clear on how to respond, what to activate, what equipment to use, and how to support the needs of each of these different sections. Next slide, please. In Kern County, we also wanted to assist the AFN community to build their level of preparedness. We worked with some industry experts, including June Isaacson-Kales and Richard DeVelder, and developed a series of videos that are broken down into an introduction, a skills test, building a support team, emergency supplies. We also had a section specific for people with physical and mobility limitations, those with low or no vision, and those with hearing issues. These videos are in English, they're in Spanish, they're captioned, they're with ASL services, and they are hosted on the Kern County Aging and Adult Services website. Next slide, please. In California, we're now dealing with what's called PSPS, where there can be extended power outages. And while that is an inconvenience to the larger community, it can be extremely dangerous for persons who are reliant on medical equipment that requires electrical power. So the county purchased, and also working with the ILC once again, a number of portable power units. They are safe for indoor use as opposed to, say, a generator. And we have those available to be deployed when we have notice of a power outage to support constituents in their home to continue to operate their medical equipment. Next slide. When Kern County stood up our COVID-19 vaccination clinics, we were again grateful to the ILC. We wanted to make sure that our clinics met the whole community needs. And the ILC helped us to develop a working group of the stakeholder organizations. Those participants actually came to the site. They walked through, they gave us feedback on things that we were missing, things that we could improve upon. We used the real-time on-demand remote ASL interpretation services. We had that available and that was used. We also did the mobile clinics, and we worked on providing accessible and free transportation services for persons who requested that assistance. So we wanted to make sure that we made the availability of these COVID-19 vaccinations. We wanted to remove barriers, and we wanted to make sure that people had full access to that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Kern County does not believe that we have all the answers, but we are continuing to work as best we can. The two projects that are next up on my list is to see if we could replicate that on-demand ASL interpretation. I would like to have a blanket purchase order with a contract, and then open that up to all first responders in the county, so that if they are responding to a person who needs those services to communicate with that responder, the responder can pull out their iPad, pull out their cell phone, and be able to communicate using that service. The other project that we are working on is that we will be developing our own evacuation plans specific for skilled nursing facilities and assisted living centers during disaster response, because evacuation of those sites requires additional training, additional planning, and the Ombudsman program will be key and instrumental to our success on that. I didn't include a page for my thank you and goodbye, but this is my last slide. So thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thanks, Georgiana. Now we're going to hear from Carly Pacheco.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Vance. Thanks, Georgiana. Thanks to the Pacific ADA Center for hosting this event. Georgiana mentioned independent living centers. I am the executive director of Freed, and we are another independent living center in California. So ILC of Kern County that Georgiana is partnering with is a sister center of ours. I want to give you a little piece of information about what an ILC is for those who might be unfamiliar. So there are 28 independent living centers in the state of California. There are about 400 centers nationally, and these are independent nonprofits that are peer-led organizations. So we serve people with disabilities, and we are people with disabilities. A minimum of 50%, 51% of our board and staff must be individuals with disabilities. So that lived experience that Vance is talking about and that expertise comes not only from working with the disability community, but we are representative of the disability community. So Freed's been an independent living center since 1985. We serve 5 counties northeast of Sacramento, but today I'm going to focus specifically on Nevada County, where we've experienced a lot of emergency events, but also have a really, I think, a sort of a model relationship with our Office of Emergency Services. Next slide. So a little bit about what Freed does in general around emergency management. We work with our local Office of Emergency Services on emergency planning and sheltering needs. So we meet with them regularly. We consult with them similarly to what Georgiana described. Helping ensure that the AFN population is integrated into all levels of planning, response, and recovery for events. We provide information to our consumers on personal preparedness. So anyone who receives services from us, we talk about personal preparedness during the intake process. We want to get them signed up for any notification and alert systems. And there's a large partnership with our Office of Emergency Services to support that. For example, our county has just adopted a new system called Zone Haven, which I'll talk just a little bit about in the next slide. And so ensuring that we can get individuals made fully aware of that resource so that they can utilize it is a key piece of what we do as well. During events, we suspend our normal intake process. We want to serve people quickly and as effectively as we can. And so we work with consumers who may have lost assistive technology and need replacement, consumers who may be struggling with any sort of disability related need around that event, and integrate our services with the sort of the web of services that are happening to make sure that folks with disabilities are getting what they need. And, you know, public safety power shutoffs have been mentioned today. So that is something that we're dealing with in California quite a bit. During those events, we provide temporary housing, transportation, and financial assistance. And outside of those events, we provide those backup batteries similar to what Georgiana showed to sort of help ensure people are prepared prior to those events. Today, I'm actually going to talk about an event that wasn't a public safety power shutoff, but that was a mass power outage, and for which we were authorized to use those resources for PSPS events to meet the need. So I'm going to talk about a specific recent event that we've gone through today. You can move to the next slide. So a little bit about Nevada County. We are a high fire threat county. So all of our county is in tier 2 or 3. Those designations are developed by the California Public Utilities Commission. And essentially it means we're a really high fire threat area. We also are impacted by winter storms. We have quite a rural area of our counties. A lot of people live far outside of the city centers. There's a lot of private roads that aren't maintained by the county necessarily. There are many people that rely on well water, which is in a power shutoff event, also means that you don't often have access to water. We have an older population as far as the state goes, so a large number of older adults. And we've had a lot of public safety power shutoff experiences, some that have been very long. So some of our first experience with public safety power shutoffs, some people were without power up to like 8 days. So really significant events. And interestingly enough, we have multiple utility companies, so that also just sort of complicates the matter. The eastern end of our county butts up against the state of Nevada, and their power comes through that state. And so we have 3 different power utility companies that feed the county as a whole. So kind of an interesting geographic area for us. And you can move to the next slide. So working off of Vance's kind of model, right, of integration, partnership, and synergy. So how do we integrate? So we have this established relationship with our local Office of Emergency Services. It's been going on for many, many years. And Freed has been in the county since 1985. So we've been working together for quite a long time. It's a smaller county. There's about 100,000 people. There's lots of collaboration that happens here. So a little bit of a small town feel. One of the pieces is a key member of the Office of Emergency Services here used to be a Freed staff member. So we know each other, we live close, we collaborate in many ways quite a bit. We have a monthly coordination meeting. We want to stay on top of emergency response and planning. That helps keep things at top of mind. We do this year round. So it just keeps us connected with updates that are happening, changes, and can make sure that we're always aware of what's going on. We help participate in emergency plan development and trainings. So we do have a couple of trainings a year with the hospital, local nursing homes and facilities. Freed is a piece of those trainings, transit. So we do participate in some of those trainings around moving individuals out of facilities. We also have an aging and disability resource connection. So a group of all the nonprofits and organizations that are serving older adults and people with disabilities that we're meeting with regularly and coordinating with regularly. So we can really gather quite a lot of unmet needs from that group that we can also raise up to our Office of Emergency Services. And really, I think we operate from this standpoint that when you prioritize those with access and functional needs, what you're actually doing is taking care of the whole community and making sure you're meeting everyone's needs. So that's just a little bit about integration. If you move to the next slide, we've got an example, I think, of how really integrating access and functional needs into all of the work we're doing helps prepare everyone. So one of the tools that Nevada County uses is a Ready, Set, Go handbook. This is direct mailed to every household in the county once a year for the last several years. And it integrates those access and functional needs strategies into the emergency preparedness plan that everyone is provided. So it's just part of the planning process that everyone is hopefully going through, being provided an opportunity to go through. And this, so I have a page on the screen from that book. The first page, 4 Steps to Emergency Preparedness for All. And the county actually used Freed's planning tools that we use with consumers to develop this 4-step plan that they provide to everybody. So just an example of how really integrating AFN into what everyone is doing meets everyone's needs. And the book also highlights our public safety power shutoff services. So again, everyone can be aware of what is available should they have those needs. So some examples of how this integration is built into these planning tools is that assistive technology questions are built in, durable medical equipment needs are built in, service animals are built in, medications are built in. Discussion around evacuating early before a watch or a warning phase has happened if you're at a higher risk or you have some specific needs. I see in the chat someone's looking at requesting a copy of the handbook. I will, when I'm done here, when we open up for questions, I'll put a link in the chat, or maybe we can send that out after this. So yeah, it's available online, and I think it's a really great tool. And you can move to the next slide. So how do we partner? Georgiana talked about an AFN seat at their Emergency Operations Center. And at times Freed has a seat at the Emergency Operations Center. It really sort of depends on the event and the circumstance and when it makes sense, but that's a role that we play at times. So we, again, have that direct line of communication. We also share direct contact information across partners. So I have the program manager of our Office of Emergency Services, the emergency operations coordinator. We share cell phone numbers and an understanding that we can call off hours, right? And make each other aware of what might be happening and what we're hearing. We co-plan with our local 211, Public Health, County Social Services, and Office of Emergency Services. So we have coordinated meetings with all of those groups. And we have a shared communication system during emergency events. So our local 211 has a tool that they use that not only shares sort of situational awareness information and resource information in real time as that changes, but we also can share referrals from 211 directly to Freed, directly to County Social Services. And we can share referral information back to the county when we need to escalate a situation that's going to need some additional specific support. So that tool has been really critical and was really critical in this event that we recently went through. You can move to the next slide. So this event that I'm going to talk about was a pretty massive winter storm for our county. It's something that we haven't seen in many decades and was referred to as one of these 100-year storms. So overnight, we got a significant amount of snowfall in all areas of the county, and not all areas of the county typically get snowfall because part of our county is not at a very high elevation. So 2/3 of the county was without power. There were over 500 individual power outages. Many, or I would almost say most, roads were blocked. On the screen, you have an image of a snow-covered road, an emergency vehicle behind a tree, which has fallen onto power lines, blocking that road. This was a very typical scene all over the county. And the longest individuals were without power was 16 days. So it was also a very long event duration for people. So something that was very different that we had not dealt with in either the duration or the number of individuals that were affected. You can move to the next slide. So just quickly, this is a timeline of that event. So, and note, this is right after the Christmas holiday and during the New Year's holiday. So it was a particularly challenging time. We had lots of people on vacation, things like that. The other challenge was that many of our staff and county staff were stuck. So many people were stuck in their homes for at least 3 or 4 days. On the chart, this highlights, so we had our initial snowfall December 27th. We had additional snowfall on the 29th, and the largest number of customers without power was 32,000. And something to note is that a customer can also be, for example, a mobile home park is one customer and might have 100 households within that customership. So county roads were not cleared until January 2nd. So it took about 7 days for all county roads to be opened. And then again, we have a lot of private roads that maintained sort of being blocked for longer than that, depending on down power lines and things like that. So again, it was a pretty significant event. We really saw power restoration for everyone by January 11th. And you can move to the next slide. So what worked well? We had, quick phone call and communication with Office of Emergency Services and us. So OES was able to share the scope of the challenge, and we were able to let them know what available resources we had. We worked together to obtain additional resources. So this was not a public safety power shutoff. I did not have authorization to use those resources to meet these significant needs that we saw initially. But working with the county was able to do some advocacy with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. And within a couple of hours of these conversations, we had authorization to use those services. So that collaboration was really successful. We worked together a lot around community messaging and misinformation. So social media and also some other providers had some information released that just wasn't correct and was kind of clogging up communication for us. And so really working together to clear that misinformation and that miscommunication so that people knew what resources were actually available and where they could go to get those. We had a shared referral system between 211, the county, and Freed. So I've talked about that. That was incredibly critical here for this event. We screened an unprecedented number of individuals and found that people with disabilities and older adults that we typically didn't need to serve during a power shutoff, suddenly when you can't exit your home and no one can get to you and you don't have access to heat or water, those situations become, significant health risk situations. And so the number of people that we served really increased for this event. And then we were able to triage information back to the county. So some of what we were doing was talking to people about to call 911 or when to call 911 or calling 911 with them in a three-way call when they were really stuck and things were critical. But if they had, say, enough resources to get them through the next day, then perhaps it was going to become a really emergent situation. We were able to escalate those folks back to the county, and the county could mobilize their teams to help clear snow and roads to get folks out. You can move to the next slide. So we were communicating with shelter locations and assisting individuals that had complex needs there. We were able to really be eyes and ears in the community and feed that information back to the county. So towards the end of the event, what we saw is people were running out of propane. So they might have a household generator that had kept them going, but now propane was becoming really short. They weren't able to get refills, and the county was able to mobilize to really get propane resources moving and flowing again. We collaborated with paratransit, transit, and county staff working on transportation out of the area when that needed to happen. And county staff were reassigned to actually answer 211 calls to keep up with that need and to do door-to-door check-ins and resources for mobile home residents because we identified that those populations really had some specific needs as well. So actually county legal staff was door knocking, door to door, checking in with those mobile home residents to make sure they could get connected to what they need. And you can move to the next slide. So we actually served 4 counties for this event. We received 917 individual requests for services. We provided 82 hotel rooms for a total of 165 individuals that needed to get somewhere out of the area that had power. We provided transportation to hotels when that was necessary. We provided 725 food vouchers for individuals in hotels or individuals with some specific dietary needs that may have lost food, and 574 gas vouchers to help people with the cost of keeping generators running and to support propane purchases. And you can move to the next slide. And I'll just say that those were, we've never encountered an event that needed this level of response. So it was really pretty significant for us. So what did we learn, right? Synergy, part of this, as Georgiana said, which I think is true, like we're never experts, we're never fully there. We always have room for improvement. We always can learn. We learned a lot from this event. So we've recognized that, you know, the county with county staff only has a daily briefing. We need community partners to also be able to attend those county briefings. So we've provided that feedback and we're working on that plan right now. We need additional partners to join our monthly coordination meeting with Office of Emergency Services. So we're expanding that meeting so that we really have the full web of those organizations that are providing response during an event together and doing that monthly. The county is going to create a community-based organization liaison position in their emergency operations center. So that's not something that they've had before, but something that they recognize from this event would have been really helpful, and they're going to create that position. And, you know, we had this great collaborative referral tool, but it didn't fully meet all the needs. And we saw with this amount of individuals needing support, there were some ways that we struggled. So the county is going to provide information technology staff to help us build a tool that will better meet those needs. And then we're working together on the development of a VOAD, which is a voluntary organizations active in disaster for Nevada County, probably in collaboration with some neighboring counties, just so we can even further cement sort of our relationship and how different organizations can provide support in these disasters. So that's also my last slide, and I will turn it back to Louis and the team for questions.
All right, thank you so much. Everyone, this is the time to submit your questions in the chat window if you have not already, and we'll start going through them now. There's a lot of them. So going back to Georgiana's presentation, the first question was, did you have money to grant out, or did you get a grant to provide the funds?
Thank you for the question. We included these as projects in our emergency management program grant called the EMPG. So those were grant funds from FEMA to the state, to us, and including them as projects allowed us to use the grant funds. So we didn't have any local funds, but we used some of our grant funds for that.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Actually, this is more of a statement. Maybe this will be covered, but we will be writing a policy on what to do with durable medical equipment after an emergency situation. For example, if someone uses a wheelchair while at our shelter and they don't have one where they reside, should we give them the wheelchair when the emergency is over and they leave the shelter, especially applicable for those persons without stable housing? So it's just their comment, but if any of you want to add to that, that'd be fine.
Louis, go ahead, Vance.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say this is actually a really important issue, because what we found oftentimes following a disaster, people do lose their durable medical equipment, either because their home or apartment is burned down, or because they're not able to get back into their home or property based on the damage in the surrounding area. They evacuate so quickly, they just can't take it on. So thankfully, through our partners, whether that's an ILC or whether it's American Red Cross or CalRES, or others, we're oftentimes able to get them DME in shelters. And if we can send that DME along with those individuals, we always try to do that. That said, and this is just one important note, if there is a federally declared disaster, we typically say that we are loaning that equipment to individuals. And the reason why we say loan instead of give is because if there's a FEMA reimbursement or a FEMA award that's going to be associated with that, we don't want for that individual to be essentially penalized for receiving that equipment. But yeah, we always try and send it along with them.
Did someone else also want to add to that?
This is Carly. I think Vance covered it. I was just going to say, in California, there's some other specific funding sources that can be used during a disaster to provide for lost durable medical equipment or assistive technology as well. So I really also suggest connecting with an independent living center in your area.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Hold on, I lost my place. Okay, here we go. What are the specs of the product that is not a generator that Kern County has available for residents?
Thank you. If you Google portable power supply units, you're going to find a bunch of equipment that is not reliant on gasoline or any other kind of fuel that would be dangerous to burn inside. A lot of people use them for camping and things like that. The ones we went through a competitive process are from a company called Yeti, Y-E-T-T-I, because we wanted to make sure we had large units that would have an extended runtime, that were easy to use, that had clear dials so the user could understand how much power was left, and also with solar panels to recharge them if the electricity hadn't come on. We were very concerned about people trying to use power equipment that would be life-threatening indoors. So there is a lot of it available out there.
Okay.
This is
Yeah,
Dan.
you should add to that, please.
I just wanted to say, so there's another great resource on this. So if you look at the Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program, which is run by the California Foundation of Independent Living Centers, and specifically designed to assist folks before, during, and after PSPS events. They've done a lot of research to find out what type of equipment is going to be most helpful in terms of things like backup batteries or generators. And what they've done is they've tested them all. And so they can basically tell you, look, if you've got a CPAP machine, this is what device you might want to use in terms of a model for a battery or a generator, versus if you've got an O2 concentrator or you've got a charger wheelchair, you might want to go with a different device. And it's really important because I think a lot of times we just assume a backup battery is a backup battery. And we know, based on our unique needs, that one battery may not be the right fit for all people. And that program also is, if you live in a high fire threat district, it can help you fund those devices. So I encourage people to check that resource out and to make sure that they're getting the right device that's going to be best for them. And that's also going to be able to take them down a road that will hopefully lessen the financial impact of buying that type of device.
Thanks, Vance. Okay, moving on to the next thing. Georgiana, you had another compliment in the chat. Excellent approach, accessible communications and other services, Georgiana. The next question was, if time permits at the end, and we're going to do this, I would like more information on the AEL and where I can access this list. Could a link be put into the chat? For example, I recently learned that autism supplies, in quotes, are approved for PA reimbursement. Wondering if these items would also be on the AEL for potential purchase in advance of a disaster via grant. Thank you. And then the person said they found the link to FEMA AEL, but would still like for Georgiana to speak a bit more on this if she can.
Absolutely. So the AEL, you want to keep that link with you because that's the verbiage to use when you are speaking with your local emergency manager if you're working on a project. And there is an AEL number, which is 19AF-01-COMM, which is for communications and sensory support. The AELs are written broadly enough that you have a lot of flexibility within that category to get the equipment that is right for the mission that you are trying to accomplish. So FEMA's list was expansive enough that I think you could frame whatever equipment you're looking for. If it relates to AFN issues, you're going to find a home for it within those AEL numbers. I've got just that sheet of the AELs on my desk because I'm constantly referring to it. But for anyone else who didn't find the link, if you just Google FEMA authorized equipment list, it will take you to the AEL.
Great, thank you. And you should also note, Georgiana, there is a link in there. Somebody said would like to talk to you about DefLink's accessible hazard alert system for your community, and put a link in there and their address in there, okay?
I found that and I will be reaching out to them. Thank you.
Oh, okay, next question. What are the capabilities of your 911 system? Do you use a smart 911 system in which disabled can register to a document access need, such as evacuation with a wheelchair? And two, what mistakes or missteps have you learned from or would advise others against? And can you get a copy of the Ready, Set, Go PDF?
This is Georgiana. Was that question to me?
Vicky, can you reply in the chat about that? I'm not sure either if that's to Georgiana or to Carly. So 1 second, for anyone, she says. Okay.
This is Georgiana. For our Ready Kern system, I think we've got it pretty much down. We are going to be building up to add to what's called IPAWS, which is the federal government's alert and warning platform, which allows us more capability. Kern County has had Smart 911, which is a program I really admire, but I am told that the grant that funded it is running out, and there is discussion that Kern will no longer have Smart 911, which is very disappointing to me. We do not in Kern County support any kind of established database of people registering their disabilities. I'm very much opposed to that. So I was looking to Smart 911 to be our resource during a response to be able to get information. So I'm not quite sure where we're going to go from here, but it is an issue we need to address.
And this is Carly with Freed. I don't believe we have a Smart 911 system because that's the first I've heard of such a thing. So I'm writing that down to look into that. And we in Nevada County and really all our counties, we've also advocated similarly to what Georgiana said, where we don't advocate for any registries for a number of reasons. And I've pasted a link to that Ready, Set, Go handbook into the chat. So feel free to grab that there.
This is Georgiana one more time, just because we've got Vance. Hey, Vance, if the governor ever says, how could California use some of our surplus? We'd love it if the state could fund Smart 911, because I think it's a good program. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So Smart 911 has been deployed in various counties throughout the state, and I believe it's actually growing. We're in the process of updating 911, not just to make it but more accessible. I mean, we've already got it to where people can text 911 now, which has been great, not just for people who, for example, are in the deaf community, but also we're finding that sometimes people are hiding in other rooms and saying, I can't talk, but come help. And these other systems are existing where you can essentially voluntarily go into the system and say, I use a power wheelchair, or I have the following needs. And the idea there is that on a 911 call, you may not either have the time or the wherewithal to convey that on that call. But if you want, you can pre-populate the information so that first responders arriving at your door are going to have that info. So we can provide updates on what the status is in terms of a county by county breakout of that. But that's a capability that we're trying to make sure everybody's got.
All right, we are running out of time. Your reference earlier, Georgiana, to the handbook or the manual. If you were saying if you make that available, if you wanted to make that available through us, as a link as part of this webinar, you could do that. Otherwise, your contact is there for people to get a hold of you. So we're going to realize that many of you still may have questions for the speakers, and there's a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to. Apologize if we did not get a chance to ask your question. If it is an ADA related question, you can contact your regional ADA center. That would be our Pacific ADA Center at 1-800-949-4232 if you'd like to ask that question. If you'd like to get a hold of Carly or Georgiana or Vance, I believe their contact information is there. If not, go ahead and, if you guys wouldn't mind putting that into the chat, people can get that and they can contact you directly. You all are going to receive an email with a link to an online session evaluation. Please complete that evaluation for today's program as we value your input. I want to demonstrate the importance of the webinar series to our funder to keep it going. We want to thank our speakers today for sharing their time and knowledge with us. And it was a really great presentation. All of you really wanted to let you know that. A reminder that today's session was recorded and it will be available for viewing next week at adapresentations.org in the archive section of emergency management. Our next webinar will be on April 14th, and we hope you can join us. Watch your email 2 weeks ahead of time for the announcement of the opening of registration. So thank you all for attending the session today. Thanks again, Vance, Carly, Georgiana, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for the opportunity, Louis. Much appreciated. Thanks, everybody.